Well, good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I am your host, Erica Lukes. This is UFO Classified, and do me a favor, get in there and subscribe, share, and help support this show. You know, as well as I do, if you're listening to the show, that I am very dedicated to thoughtful research, to making sure I'm pushing boundaries and putting information out there. And you also know, if you've followed my work, that over the years, my opinion has changed a great deal due to me acquiring files, and I now am proud to say I have the Western UFO Archives, which is one of the biggest in the country, and it will continue to get bigger. I will be working with people like Dave Marler, who has been incredible. He actually sent me a few audio recordings of Ann Druffel's interviews, which is just a thrill. I'll be exchanging information with him, and this is the way that we are going to build a collaborative, cohesive effort where we are sharing information, where we're giving this information to a younger generation who can make informed decisions about what to believe and where to turn for good information. As we know, on social media, YouTube, Facebook, we can get pulled into a lot of different things, and sometimes we get information that takes us down a very dangerous path. And it is very interesting to me as I look through my wonderful archive. I found this, I just wanted to share this with you, UFO magazine from 1999, and the cover, latest news, Mars orbiter, but then cover story, FEMA in charge, suspended by FEMA. So you have to be very careful in the UFO world that you're not falling prey to conspiracy theory and dangerous ideas that definitely can have an influence not only on your own personal life, but your families and friends. And so I definitely urge you to step back and look at where conspiracy has been inserted into this important subject. That was your public service announcement. So thank you anyway for being here. I want to thank my co-host and partner in crime, Scott Brown. Scott, how are you this evening?
Doing good. How about you?
You know, hanging in there. It's a beautiful fall day here in Utah. The leaves are changing, and I am getting ready for just an exciting weekend. So I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to just thank you, Scott, and Mario, who's behind the scenes helping with the show. I want to thank you, Scott, for finding wonderful guests to come on. You really did a wonderful thing when you brought Ryan Gordon on, who we have been in contact with, and he took a trip out to Dulce and uncovered quite a bit. It basically uncovered the fact that it really was just a myth created by specific people. So it is interesting to see how that goes. But thanks, good job on bringing wonderful guests on the show. And tonight is another night that I know will be one for the memory books. And finally, I get to talk to Bill Chocker. This has been something that has been on my bucket list for a long, long time, and I appreciate the fact that he is up early and is joining us. This is going to be a wonderful show. Bill has been in this subject for decades. He's been intrigued with UFOs since 1966, when his hometown of Grafton in New South Wales, Australia, became the focus of UFO activity that attracted national headlines. He began undertaking deeper research and investigations from 69 forward. In 69, with the publication of the Condon Report, which concluded there was really nothing of scientific value to the UFO study. That had a profound effect on Bill, as it did many people in that time period. He joined APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization group, which confirmed his growing awareness of the global dimensions of the UFO mystery. He also joined the U.S. MUFON organization, serving as their representative for a number of years down there. And he joined the Sydney-based UFO Investigation Center as a country member and investigator. And I mean, I could, Bill, I don't even know, because your bio goes on, and your credentials are so impressive. And so why don't you just step right in? Welcome to the show, but step in and continue there, because what an impressive bio.
Yeah, well, thank you, Erica and Scott, for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, I've been sort of watching your show for ages, and yeah, quite intrigued by some of the guests and some of the controversies that get stirred up and looked at on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. My involvement in the UFO field does go back quite a long way, and I've got to say that during the late '60s, young teenager, but sort of embraced the Content Committee report in the local town library. So amazingly, they had a hardback copy of the book there, and I more or less got it out on permanent loan for a number of months, and read it probably about, I don't know, half a dozen times, trying to get my head around it, because most people generally read only the introduction and Dr. Edward Condon's sort of conclusions and recommendations and that kind of thing, and very few people sort of went into the meat of the report and examined all the case histories. And it was when I did that I was rather intrigued to find that something like a third of the cases seem to be unexplained. And I thought, well, how do you reconcile that with a conclusion that says that there's nothing here of any merit? I think any serious scientist that gets into a field of endeavour, if sort of a third of their case data remains inexplicable or unexplained, then you come to the conclusion that, there's something worthwhile looking into and a little more deeply. And that's basically what I did, and probably quite a number of other people did at the time. They were intrigued by this phenomenon that seemed to generate a scientific study that was so flawed and so controversial. You know, the history of the operation of the Content Committee was something that intrigued me, and it was just besieged by controversy right through its duration. And so that made me think that there's something worthwhile looking into, and particularly when the Content Committee kind of recommended that demerit points should be given to school students if they took an interest in the UFO phenomenon. That I found incredibly bizarre. Wow. And then on we went. So I wasn't too worried about getting demerit points. So and the more we got into it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, the concept that this was a kind of a forbidden area, I found intriguing, and the more I got into it, the more intriguing it became. And luckily, when I went to university in the early 70s, at the University of New England at Armidale, that's in the New England district of New South Wales in Australia, and I was kind of intrigued and set up a sort of a university UFO group. It was a very informal collective, and that's generally the way I like to operate, rather than a formalised group. I much prefer an informal kind of collective, because it doesn't constrain you in group politics and that kind of stuff. And I know it's probably outrageous to suggest there's a lot of politics in UFOs, but
no,
that's my experience for decades.
That is scandalous. So scandalous.
Yeah. I know it's an outrageous claim on my part that there is politics in the UFO field, but that's the way the reality is, unfortunately. But
I'm glad you said it first. Yeah. That's good. That's important.
Yeah. But I've tried to avoid that over the decades, but unfortunately, sometimes you get dragged into it. And, that's the nature of the UFO game, I guess. But my interest has mainly been focused on scientific potential of the UFO subject, looking at it from a number of different points of view. The historical perspective. In 1996, I had a book called The Oz Files, Australian UFO story, published, and then more controversially, in 2005, I had the book Hair of the Alien, published through a division of Simon & Schuster in New York. Disappointingly, they didn't really release that many copies of the book in Australia. Simon & Schuster over here seemed to be more interested in kind of basically gardening and cooking books, and couldn't quite get them enthusiastic about plugging a UFO book here in Australia. But they sent a limited number of copies, which sold out within a couple of weeks, and then basically it took the life of the book on Amazon mainly, and that's how most people get hold of it. So.
And that's incredible. And I have to ask you, when you first became passionate about this subject, how did your family and your friends respond, your colleagues?
Well, I've never have really had much kind of, I guess, ridicule or negativity, basically, because a lot of people sort of thought it was a fairly serious kind of engagement into the subject. I suppose inevitably people initially think, oh, UFOs, whatever, because there was that during the 60s and 70s, that element of kind of ridicule that kept coming up, but there was always that core aspect that, there's something worthwhile looking at here, and it's only when people started to engage deeply with the UFO subject that they came to the conclusion that there's something of merit here. But the way I see the UFO field is that it's really divided into two areas, very simplistically. That is that most of the time we're dealing not with the UFO reality, but with what I call UFO theatre, and the engagement is mainly on that level. But from time to time, you do see what appears to be core aspects of the UFO phenomenon, or UAP, to use the current kind of preferred nomenclature. And so I'm pretty much guided by the evidence rather than any kind of set opinion as to what's going on, because any theories that one comes up with what's going on here tends to be tested rather sorely by the reality of what's going on as well, and one needs to get their mind open as to what is actually going on.
And I mean, it's interesting, and I have to ask you, because you aren't in America, you don't have I think you're better off in a lot of regard, because you don't have this kind of circus that you have here
Right.
in the
I
United
said I
States.
was in America. I'm actually in Australia. So.
Right. No,
Yeah.
because you're not in America. You
Yeah, that's true.
You have that. I think you have a gift in a lot of ways, because you're able to stay out of what's going on here. The kind of Storm Area 51, the Bob Lazar, kind of that whole commercial aspect of things, and then you don't get probably in the middle of that. But did you find when you became public about this, were you approached by people in the United States? And if so, who were they?
Yeah, sure. Initially, my sort of connections with the UFO field publicly were with the Sydney-based UFO Investigation Centre, and that was an organisation that had been in existence since the mid-1950s. In fact, it was often regarded as one of the first of the UFO organisations worldwide. Sort of came into being as a kind of a reincarnation of Edgar Jarrell's organisation, which was called the Australian Flying Saucer Research Bureau. And Edgar Jarrell was a controversial figure, but often seen as the father of Australian ufology, and got caught up in the rather notorious sort of Men in Black saga that was perpetuated by people like Bender and Barker and all that kind of thing. And so it had a controversial beginning, but then Edgar Jarrell disappears from the UFO scene, or flying saucer scene back in those days mainly, and but many of the early pioneers of the Australian UFO scene continued on and created the UFO Investigation Centre in about 1956, and then that organisation continued. Went through a bit of a troublesome time during 1969, because 1969 was a very formative period for me. And not only was it the publication of the Conduct Committee, but unlike a lot of places around the world, here in Australia, the UFO phenomenon, for whatever it was, put on a huge performance. And there was kind of like a nationwide UFO wave of sighting, particularly in my hometown area and on the north coast of New South Wales, and also up in New England as well. So here I am as a young kind of, latter teenager, getting interested in the UFO field, and then here's the UFO phenomenon performing on my doorstep, and starting to witness UFOs myself, and then started to get actively engaged. I decided to also join the APRO organisation, the organisation that Jim and Coral Lorenzen ran, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation. I found that a really interesting organisation because they had a lot of scientific consultants connected with them, and they also defined the international dimensions of the UFO phenomenon in a big, big way. You know, they had consultants practically in countries all around the world, and here in Australia it was Peter Norris, who was the a long-time veteran of the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society, which became the Victorian UFO Research Organisation or Research Society, and that's now largely defunct. But there are manifestations of UFO research and UFO interests right around Australia, and it's been a strong, vibrant force. I joined MUFON as well, became a state representative for them. In more recent years, I was asked to become their international coordinator, but by then I was kind of not that keen to continue to participate in MUFON, and declined the invitation to get more deeply involved with the group. And so largely most of my interest, apart from APRO and MUFON, sort of really manifested when I visited the United States. I was working as a quality assurance manager, a laboratory manager, with as it turned out, the Wrigley organisation. And so they gave me the opportunity to go to Chicago for an international quality assurance conference. And during that visit in 1984, I got to meet and stay with Alan Hynek at his place, and got the opportunity to access the archives of CUFOS at that time, and was then invited by Alan Hynek to become a member of CUFOS and also a contributing editor to the International UFO Reporter as well. And so that was a lot of fun, and kept that involvement going until the International UFO Reporter stopped publishing more recently.
And let me ask you what your thoughts were of Hynek. How was he as an individual? What did you find fascinating about him, and what were some of his quirks?
Well, when I was there, it was clear that he was like a lightning rod for UFO enthusiasts, UFO researchers, etc. And it was kind of like open house when I was there initially, and it was kind of waiting for people to essentially leave. And I stayed in, I think, one of Alan Hynek's son's bedrooms, and I was waiting for the next morning so I could access the archives, and then got to spend some time where I interviewed Alan Hynek directly, and also got for me, what was more important was that I got the opportunity to go through with Alan Hynek when he brought down his field notes that he took in his visit in 1973 to Australia. And so I spent a good couple of hours with him going through his notes that he took while he was in Australia, both on an astronomical visit, but also promoting his book, The UFO Experience, as well. So that was fabulous. His notes was nothing like Jim McDonald's notes. Alan Hynek tended to have a more episodic way of writing notes and that kind of stuff. So half the time I was explaining to him what those notes represented, because his memory was starting to be a bit fragmented, and his notes were very, very fragmented in their own right. So it was a case of establishing what each little point represented. And because I was heavily involved in Australian UFO history by that stage, I was able to help him out to remind him what it all meant, and that kind of thing. So it was a collaborative review of Alan Hynek's notes, and that was really interesting and exciting for me as well.
Oh, I bet that was fascinating. I mean, he's He was such an enigmatic, if I could speak English, person. I mean, he was, obviously friends with valet and, dabbled in all sorts of things. And I mean, can you address, or do you know how much he was involved in pursuing, like valet did, Satanism? And Anton LaVey, was there any connection with Hynek with regard to that?
Uh, I think if there was any, it was extremely minor for Hynek. The main impact that I had with Alan was essentially seeing somebody from a scientific point of view who wanted to promote a serious scientific investigation of the UFO phenomenon. Yes, sure, there was some evidence that there was, I guess, the paranormal aspects that Jacques Vallée sort of brought Alan Hynek into. He was interested in that aspect, but I think mainly it was more about trying to establish the scientific basis of the UFO subject and its potential to become a core, ultimately a core science kind of avenue of inquiry. But at that point, he was also preparing to move to Arizona with the view that maybe there was an opportunity to get further funding, but that didn't play out very well.
Well, it is fascinating to me, and I think it's so important, when you look at people and you look at their lives. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, you have to look at everything that makes them who they are, and I think for Valet, for me to read Forbidden Science, to read all of his journals and things, and to hear him or read his description of some of the people that he became involved with, and you look at Scientology and some of these connections that were kind of embedded in that group of people during the late 60s and early 70s, and how did their interactions with all of these people shape the UFO narrative, or did it? And I think all of that is really fascinating, and that's an important part of history to make sure we understand.
Yeah, well, I think Alan Hynek's sort of interest in the paranormal was always there, but I don't think it was an overriding kind of aspect of his engagement with the UFO subject. He clearly, with decades of involvement with the United States Air Force as their astronomical consultant, initially he was pretty dismissive of the subject and found it almost like a sport, in the sense of being able to explain a lot of cases with astronomical explanations. But obviously, the more engaged he was with the phenomenon and the reports, he concluded that there was something legitimate going on. And ultimately, as we all know through history, he did come out and basically endorse the validity of the UFO subject. And so for quite a while, he was the main kind of spokesman and main kind of personality for promoting the serious evolution of the UFO subject.
Absolutely. He was an icon and will always be legendary in this subject for many, many reasons. And so I have to ask you, and I want to thank Steve Wills for donating in Super Chat, and he just wants to say that you're excellent. And he's always been fascinated by the 1966 Burke's Flat, the bent headlight beams case, and was wondering if you would be willing to discuss this.
Yeah, that's one case in particular that really attracted my attention. I thought more than any other case during that year, and indeed for decades before and after. If that case was valid, it really kind of highlighted that there's something quite extraordinary in nature about this event, because essentially it involved an engineering guy, Ron Sullivan, driving through country Victoria, observing a light in a field off to his right, and that as his car drove towards it, and this is sort of early night, he suddenly notices that his headlight beam is sort of veering in a kind of a V shape off into the field, and he thought there was something wrong with his headlights and started to compensate by turning to the left, as he did that, he realised he was heading for a tree and heading off the road, forces his car back into the right direction. And while he's passing this object, the degree of bend in the headlight beam became more and more acute until it becomes almost at a right angle to the position of the object in the field. And what he sees is this rather extraordinary display of what appeared to be two kind of bodies of light, bottom and top, and kind of a streamer effect in between. And it was a really bizarre event. And it was only because a fatality was reported in the same area, in fact, at the same tree that he almost collided with, that he went back and found that there was a ground trace in that field, or paddock as we call it here in Australia, and which was consistent with the position of the object in the field. And so we have I guess in Hynek's terms, a classic close encounter of the second kind, a physical trace case. And because of my chemist background, mainly focused on physical chemistry, I was really intrigued for decades, and still am, by physical trace cases, the kind of works that people like Ted Phillips did here, or rather in the United States, in terms of UFO landing cases and trace cases. That became a particular specialty of mine, focusing on that. And 1966 was a banner year. We had the Burke's Flat case. We had what's become very well known now, the West Hall School case, and also the Tully case earlier in the year, which is one of the best examples of a UFO landing case.
Wow.
So 1966 was a crazy year.
Wow. I mean, and you've had so many fascinating cases down where you are, and it's like we never get to hear about any of these things. And to me, I mean, you got the Royal Australian Files, and so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, that was really interesting. Like here in Australia, the official governmental examiner of the UFO phenomenon, or UFO reports, was our Royal Australian Air Force, and they examined the UFO subject for decades, etc. Most of the time, the only kind of public thing that we got to see were their so-called annual summaries of what they referred to them as unusual aerial sightings, or UASs, and so the terminology becomes very confusing, but basically, it became pretty apparent to most serious researchers that the Air Force was really only doing a kind of a token service. Occasionally, they'd get involved and investigate a case really deeply, but that was a rarity. Most of the time, they seemed to be bent on trying to explain things as quickly as possible, get rid of the UFO problem, essentially ignore it. But they accumulated sort of thousands of cases, but eventually there was reporting in the media that people were allowed to get access to their files. Now, when I heard that, I thought, oh, that's great. Let's try and get access to the file. That didn't turn out to be the reality, and it took literally years and years to finally get to a point where they finally agreed in late 1981 to allow me to have access to the files. And what I was after was to actually be there at the Department of Defence offices in Canberra and access the files directly, not some sort of kind of sending out the odd report, heavily redacted, that kind of thing. I wanted to be there and actually examine the files in their entirety. So I don't think they were quite ready for a person like me to have access to their files, because when I rolled up on the first day, that was a Monday, and I kept going back 5 days on my first visit in 1982 during January, which happened to be the summer holidays here in Australia. And so I got access to the files and spent 5 days from 9 to 5 each day going through hundreds and hundreds of files, mainly focusing on file number series so that I could establish the entirety of what was there. And eventually, over 4 visits through to 1984, I got to access what I saw as a continuity of cases from 1955 through to 1984. So, and that involved sighting files, policy files, inquiry files. So there was a lot of material there, and it was a really fascinating kind of research exercise.
How fascinating, and thank you so much for talking about that. I think that is really incredible, and I love it. I love the history of the subject, and the fact that you've had access to some of this is incredible. And so I've got a question from Elle, and she wants to know what your thoughts are on the Knowles family case that occurred in 1988 when they were driving from Perth to Melbourne.
Yeah, that's a really intriguing case, because it probably was the first example of serious checkbook journalism in Australia, in the sense that here we have just an average family from Western Australia. They were travelling the Nullarbor. Now, the Nullarbor, for those in America that probably don't appreciate the extent of it, it's one of the parts of it represent the longest straight section of road in the world. It essentially covers the entire sort of lower half, going from the border region of South Australia on the eastern side right through to Western Australia, and it represents a huge kind of lengthy journey, and it's a marathon. In my younger days, I actually had an old BSA motorcycle that I took. I bought it as an army surface motorcycle and rode the motorcycle right across the Nullarbor. And I assure you, it was an epic ride. It was a major exercise, and but it was a really interesting area. But the Knowles family case was kind of an extraordinary case. It got huge publicity worldwide, in fact. And the problem with the Knowles case is that it was hard to get coherent data on it, because it had such an extraordinary effect on the family. Unfortunately, they were kind of set up a little bit by the media as kind of I don't know, the terminology in America might be country hicks, etc. But they weren't. They were just an average family from Western Australia that somehow encountered something pretty extraordinary that they couldn't understand, and it was hard for UFO researchers to do a serious investigation of the case at the time, simply because the Knowles family were besieged by the media, and it took quite a while to get data on the case together through that harsh attention of the media. But it seemed to be a really interesting case, and because of what happened to the Knowles in terms of the harsh spotlight of media, a lot of people that had experiences that night at the same time didn't come forward. They only kind of connected with researchers and others because they saw that Knowles family were kind of vilified by the media in many ways. They claimed that something sat on top of the car, lifted the car off the road, all that kind of stuff. It was a pretty bizarre case.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to just thank Matthew Riot, who donated a super sticker to the show. I appreciate it. We appreciate that, because we need your help to keep the show on the air, but not only that, but also to preserve historical archives. This is really important, you guys, so we appreciate your support. Thank you. And Charles, you make me laugh all the time, so thank you for your great comments. And so, Bill, I want to ask you, because you had, you were involved with, I mean, it's a very small group of people, even internationally. You have people like Robert Bigelow, who have been behind the scenes and involved with purchasing databases and the abduction phenomenon, near-death experiences, all of these things. Have you had experiences with Robert Bigelow or anybody that was involved in NIDS or BASS over the years?
Yeah, the only real direct connection that I had with Robert Bigelow was indirectly through Cole Kellner. There was because I got involved with Peter Khoury's case that involved the use of using forensic techniques to examine physical evidence, the hair in Peter Khoury's case, we became the target of other people that had various artifacts, etc., involved in what appeared to be alien abduction stories. And one of the cases that came into prominence, a very controversial case, was the so-called alien claw case from California. And at that time, the scientific key biochemical consultant for me wasn't publicly known, and I had to maintain his confidentiality. He eventually came out, and that was Dr. Horace Drew, who was a chief research scientist with our Australian government research organisation called the CSIRO, and he was a bona fide scientist working on DNA applications and biochemical applications through government science, and I was lucky to get him involved in supporting and supervising all the biochemical kind of investigations that we're doing with a range of cases, and the main case that we focused on was Peter Khoury's. But with Bigelow's organisation, because it was a Californian-based case with this so-called alien claw case, I was seeking somebody reliable in the United States to examine the bona fides of the case. And that turned out to be essentially Cole Kellner, who conducted some basic inquiries of the case. And he agreed to support what we were trying to do, and that was to undertake a forensic investigation of the so-called claw. Now, we determined that the claw wasn't even a claw. It turned out to be a snail, a sort of a fairly dried out sample, basically.
Wow.
And so what year was this again?
Now, that would have been probably in the early 2000s, thereabouts. I can't remember the precise year, but it was, to me, at least Bigelow's people himself supported the investigation, even when it showed up as being explainable, and we use it as a cautionary tale, essentially, to highlight that the DNA technique could verify with a tremendous amount of investigative power that we were dealing with an explainable situation. The claw wasn't a claw. It was a desiccated snail found in a closet, and basically, so it wasn't anything alien or anything of that nature. And the technique allowed us to make that identification with a high degree of certainty. So that was essentially the extent of my direct involvement. Dr. Horace Drew did go to the States because he was originally American-based, and came to Australia and had his research career mainly in Australia. But he conducted a lot of research in some of the original pioneer DNA labs in terms of his research career. But he got to meet Bob Bigelow and meet some of the, at that time, I think it was NIDS at that time, and just prior to the transition to BAS. But it was pretty evident even at that time that it was only a limited amount of information that we were being made privy to. And ultimately, Cole Kellner approached me to get access to an area that I was separately involved with, and that was a lot of research activities and investigations that I did in Asia and China. And they were interested in getting my contacts for my Chinese investigations. And I said I was more than happy to do that if it was done on a reciprocal basis. But
Right.
That's when the relationship ended, because there was no reciprocal basis. So basically, I'm an advocate of open research, and it seemed to be a one-way flow. So basically, I didn't continue with that.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I think that that's really important. And speaking of, before we get our guest, Peter on, I want to ask you a little bit more about specifically what you did with regards to researching Chinese cases.
Well, I saw China and the Asian UFO experience as an opportunity to kind of really verify the international dimensions of the UFO phenomenon. Obviously, a lot of it seems to be to a lot of people an American-based phenomenon, but it's clearly, as AFRO emphasised in terms of their history, the UFO phenomenon was very international. But I saw it as a way of calibrating the Western perception of the UFO phenomenon by examining the Eastern or Oriental kind of manifestation of the phenomenon. And so I got the opportunity to go to China 3 times and also to Thailand and a couple of other places and get to examine the UFO phenomenon through my own eyes and also through the experience of Chinese UFO researchers as well. It was a very interesting kind of experience. And what I confirmed was that they seem to have the same attributes that we're experiencing here in the West. They had UFO sightings, they had close encounters, and they also had apparent alien abduction cases as well, which became pretty controversial as well. And so I got the opportunity to meet at least one Chinese alien abductee claimant. And what I was perhaps more interested in was the existence of possible military investigations, but that was a fairly opaque area. It was very difficult to make headway in that area. But
I would bet.
We got to learn of some military cases and that kind of thing as well. So one of my other areas of interest are solid light cases, and there was a case in China that I found particularly provocative that involved military pilots during the test of an advanced drone, and hundreds of Chinese military people and Chinese military scientists witnessed a UFO appearing, and from the bottom of the object, 2 beams of light slowly projected, the classic example of solid light. And the pilots that were sent up requested permission from the commander of the base to fire on the UFO. He pleasingly didn't get that confirmation. He wouldn't give that confirmation, so they just basically observed and reported what they were seeing close up. And so we got a pretty powerful example. It's regarded as probably one of the few officially confirmed military cases in China, but I'm sure there are others. But it's pretty a fake field to try and get military UFO case data from China.
Well, and so when you went over there, you said that you were there 3 times. Where specifically did you go?
On the first occasion, 2001, I think it was mainly Beijing based and trying to make contact with a lot of civilian groups. Unfortunately, at that time, that was fairly limited. It was basically a sounding exercise because, unfortunately, Falun Gong chose that time to conduct a number of demonstrations in both Beijing and Shanghai, and a lot of the UFO people were essentially low profile at that point in time because, unfortunately, the head of Falun Gong at that time made a connection between these organisation, cult, whatever you want to call it, meditation group or whatever. And at that time, Falun Gong was starting to flex its muscles, and the Chinese government were recognising that here was an organisation that could mobilise thousands of people. And at one time, there was thousands of people turning up in Tiananmen Square, and also Falun Gong took over a radio station in Shanghai. And I think the Chinese government realised that here's an organisation that could mobilise large numbers of people, and that's when Falun Gong became pretty much a threat to the supremacy of the Chinese government, and therefore it was deemed to be a organisation that they wouldn't permit to continue, and it became the subject of a lot of heavy-handed kind of approaches. Here in the West, we see it in all sorts of different ways, but certainly we don't treat it the same way that the Chinese government does, mainly in China. But that wasn't my main focus, obviously. I was trying to mobilise interest within the UFO field in China, the civilian groups. But that didn't really get much kind of advance until the second visit during 2005. And at that occasion, I was able to meet with a lot of civilian researchers and examined a lot of their cases. And in the following year, at a conference in Dalian, I was able to meet large numbers of Chinese researchers. So essentially, my main areas were Beijing, Dalian in northern China, and also, particularly in 2006, in Yunnan province, because we went there mainly to examine an aspect that had emerged from Peter Khoury's hair case, because there was evidence of rare Asian Mongoloid DNA present, and we managed to connect that with an indigenous tribe called the Lahu, who were in southern China, mainly in Yunnan province, and also in northern Thailand. And we got the opportunity to examine what was happening there, and trying to understand why their DNA was turning up in the hair sample that was in Peter Khoury's case here in Sydney, Australia. So very interesting investigation.
And so, did you? I mean, obviously, you're going to a communist country. I mean, what was there any blowback? I mean, were you questioned? Were you followed? How did that play out? Because I would imagine that they would be a little bit suspicious of what you were doing there.
At the time, obviously I was very careful. Like I spent a lot of time researching the situation before I went, and I spent a lot of time trying to organise experienced guides, and it was through that process that I was able to get some really good access to various parties that I wanted to contact. And so in terms of now, if I was given the opportunity to go to China, I actually would not go, because unfortunately I would regard it as too risky. Right. A couple of journalists here in Australia only were basically encouraged to leave China quickly, because they were under some fairly heavy-handed kind of questioning, and fortunately those two journalists got out in time. But now there's very little in the way of on the ground kind of journalistic representation from Australia in China. So it's rather concerning what's going on. I highlighted actually recently on my blog site, the Ozfiles, the passing of a fellow by the name of James Kibble. He was an Australian businessman that spent a lot of time in China through family business concerns in China during the 1960s and the early 70s, and helped open up China and Australian relations. And he was actually a UFO witness himself, and was also interested in understanding what was happening about UFOs in China back during that early period. He passed away recently, and but I got the opportunity as early as the 80s to meet with him and learn about what he was aware of in terms of what appeared to be a secret UFO history in China. And actually, interestingly, he's better known in the UFO field as the person who took the famous Baldwin photograph in 1966. This is a daylight UFO photograph, Polaroid, very controversial photo. A lot of people regard it as a hoax, but basically, as I got to know him, I learned that there was something really quite extraordinary going on here. This photograph was taken 4 days before the Westall school case that's become much better known in more recent times here on a worldwide basis. And that was a daylight UFO landing seen by hundreds of school kids and a number of adults. So very, very controversial case. But getting to know Jim Kibble allowed me to learn more about aspects of the UFO experience here in Australia, but also particular aspects of what was going on in China as well back during the 80s, 90s, and right through till now.
Wow. How fascinating! How fascinating! And so, and we've got we're going to bring on Peter here in a moment. But I just want to ask you, because you see a lot of, well, not a lot, but a handful of people that have gone to China, UFO researchers, and then have also gone over to Russia. And there was, I believe, 3 years ago, a conference over in Russia that was co-sponsored by the Chinese government, from my understanding, and they picked a different person from each country to go over there and represent. I mean, have you
Yeah.
had any contacts with the Russian government, and have you investigated any of the cases
Uh,
in Russia?
no, the idea of a Chinese conference, mainly organised by Chinese interests in Russia, I thought was unusual, to say the least. But what I I was actually asked to go to that conference and represent Australia, but ultimately I declined to join the organisation because I saw it as essentially a continuance of what was going on, what was being established in China, particularly the Dalian conference in 2006 and or 2005. And to me, it was kind of a limited approach, and it basically, in order to join that conference, it required me to sign a kind of a pledge that I was committed to the extraterrestrial hypothesis as the explanation for the UFO phenomenon. And basically, I was not prepared to do that, mainly because, as I tended to point out, I was being directed by the UFO evidence, not by any particular forced hypothesis and that kind of thing. So, so I didn't join the organisation. So others went to Moscow, and I'm just sort of privy to whatever information the organisation that evolved from that. I expected that wasn't going to succeed, and as it turned out, the Chinese aspect of it seemed to fall away. And then this new organisation, ICAR, or ICER, that's mainly run through Italy and Gary Heseltine in England. And it's an interesting organisation, but and there's certainly some interesting things that they're trying to do. They're trying to establish a new version of the UN kind of venture, particularly through San Marino. And so interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, so I'm all ears. So.
Oh no, it's fascinating. I think there's so many, I mean, people that get into this subject that have no idea about that conference. And to me, when I read about it and I saw some of the things that Gary Heseltine had written about it, I was like, wow, okay, this is intriguing. And I certainly don't think that I would be going over to Moscow to engage in this. I mean, you just, that just seems like a dangerous proposition all the way around, in my opinion. But
well, I didn't particularly see it as dangerous, other than I wasn't at that time thrilled with the idea of going to Putin's Moscow, simply because of certain issues of concerns, security concerns, that kind of stuff. But basically, Gary and those, they did go and they had a good time, and they were exposed to a lot of interesting aspects. But unfortunately, the Chinese part of it didn't play out.
interesting. That is so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now Peter has been waiting patiently behind the scenes, and we are going to bring him in. But let's flash forward to an important piece of work that you did that has been, I think, one of the highlights of your career. And with regards to Peter and his case. And so if you can introduce him and then talk a little bit about what led you to him, and then we'll bring Peter in, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, Peter, very interesting situation. He had a number, some sightings, but he had an experience in the 90s that seemed to imply that he had a classic kind of alien abduction experience. And for him, he comes from a Christian Maronite background, born in Lebanon, and then emigrated as a youngster to Australia with his family. and got into the building industry in Australia, in Sydney, and was quite well regarded in that area. But unfortunately, at one point, he experienced a job on-site injury apparently occurred when a number of people were trying to steal equipment from a job site, and led to him being injured. He was then off work for quite a while and trying to recover from those injuries, and was during that the experience in '96 occurred. And a lot of people have suggested, well, maybe it was all due to the injury and trauma, but one needs to keep reminding oneself that there is this physical sample, the hair sample involved, that suggests that something real had occurred. And so there was the 1992 experience and also the 1996 experience to examine. And so it was a really interesting kind of case study, and it was at that point that I brought in biochemical friends that I had secured, like Alan Hynek and Jacques Lee were involved with. There was this so-called invisible college arrangement, and all that really amounted to was that there were a series of scientifically orientated, qualified people that were really interested in doing research and investigations, but they weren't willing to stick their head up and be publicly identified, and therefore their interests were all done on a confidential basis. We had much the same arrangement with a number of people here in Australia that we developed informally over the decades, and Dr. Horace Drew turned out to be one part of that, and he only got self-identified years later, but as I investigated this case, his involvement was kept confidential, and so that enabled us, though, to conduct a detailed forensic investigation, applying sort of DNA forensic techniques to this biological sample that was recovered in the 1996 experience. So for me, it was a really interesting exercise to be able to apply scientific forensic techniques to an alien abduction case. And so I would argue that in these kind of cases, there is that potential for doing real science. And remarkably, in Peter's case, the evidence that evolved from the case seemed to support his experience rather than detract from it. So a very interesting kind of situation that developed there. And then I was asked to, initially I wrote a report for Alan Hynek's organisation, the KUFOS organisation, published that, and as a fairly lengthy article in the International UFO Reporter, that allowed some private sort of donations to support further detailed work in that area. And so we're able to do more forensic work. And so it's a multiple phase investigation in Peter's case. Initially, we examined the 92 case and then focused on the 96 case that had the hair sample involved as well. We right there?
Oh, well, you know what? I made it an hour without, not, like the mute button. It's a beautiful thing. It happens. This is me. Peter, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on. And I know that it is early at your part of the world, but we appreciate you coming on and being willing to talk about your case and what happened over the years. And so, in your words, describe to us, because there are people that are watching the show that have never heard of what happened to you in your case. So take us back to your initial encounter.
Well, good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you.
I just want to make a quick correction. Bill said 1996 with a hair sample. It was actually the 1992 case with the two females where the hair sample was retrieved. Just to set a record straight. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, it's very early in the morning for me. My
well,
degree of functionality is sort of somewhat reduced in the mornings.
that's okay. I've just finished a 12-hour shift, so if I slow my words, just give me a backhand. I'll get back on that. But yeah, look, I grew up in a Lebanese Maronite home. My family, we never discussed this topic. It was never a topic that anybody was interested in, and never ever discussed. And my first recollection was in Lebanon in the early 70s. It would have been, I'd say, 71 or probably summer 72. And in Lebanon, you go to school for like 9 months of the year. Well, back then we did anyway. And I went to school there for a year and a half. And holidays were 3 months of summer, so we had a lot of time on our hands. And as kids do, we were playing in the street in the neighbourhood with my cousins and friends. And as we're running around playing cowboys and Indians, you know, someone just called out, "Let's go play on the roof of the house across the road from our place." And everybody started running up towards the house. And as I looked behind me, I saw my cousin. She was a year and a half younger than me, Ada, and I didn't want her to be the last one there, so I let her get in front of me, and I ran last. So we run up the stairs. We got up to the top landing on the roof. There's for the security door, it was a solid steel frame door, steel door with a steel frame that was probably about 2 or 3 inches off the ground, so you had to actually step over it to get through onto the roof. And usually, every time we ran up there, you'd push the door open with your hands, and the door, because of its weight, it'd spring back at you. So everybody who ran through would always have to push it open. So as I was running through, I noticed that three or four of them had run through, and the door stayed open. And I had my arms out in front of me, thinking that this thing's going to come back and knock me out if I'm not careful. But it didn't. It just stayed open. And there and then I just couldn't figure it out. But, you know, as a kid, I didn't worry too much. So I ran onto the roof. And as soon as I got onto the roof, I noticed that my friends, my cousins, they were all standing like frozen in time, like statues, like mannequins. No movement whatsoever. And I thought, oh, okay, this is a game that we're playing, and I'm last one on the roof, so I'm in. So I just walked around and looking at their faces, trying to see a glitter in their eye. I mean, you can't just get rid of life, basically, another life lesson. They were just standing there. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start tickling them. I'm going to get a reaction if I tickle them. So I started tickling a couple of them, and I wasn't getting anything. You know, I was looking for the eyes, the crow's feet near the eyes, or a smile or something, and it was nothing. I did that to a couple of them, and then I walked up to a guy. His name's George. He was about a year and a half older than us. He was taller than me. And as I went up I wanted to tickle him under the throat just to see if I can get a reaction out of him. And as I looked up, I reached up to tickle him, and I looked up just in the sky, and I just saw this. The only thing I can describe is an egg-shaped object that was big as the house that we were actually, the roof we were on, they owned a VW, a Beetle, and that's exactly the size of this object that I've compared to. And it was just completely silver with a big windscreen. Look, imagine an egg with the pointy end at top and the rounded end at the bottom. And it had this massive windscreen that was very darkly tinted, similar to when you have your TV screen off. But I could just see through it. And it was I'd say it was about 30 meters above us. And as I was looking at it, I could see two silhouettes in there sitting down, and it wasn't a helicopter. Like we had seen the Israelis would fly helicopters through and dump a lot of paper, like propaganda papers in all different colours. And as children, we'd run around and pick up all the colours that we could. We didn't care what was on the propaganda that was written on there. We just wanted the papers and the colours. So we were very aware of helicopters flying very low. We'd see the pilot, we'd see the guys sitting on the side of the door with their feet hanging down onto the landing pads. So I was very, very aware of what a helicopter looked like. This was nothing like it. This had no propellers, no landing gear, nothing. Just a perfectly shaped, egg-shaped object, smooth, very, very shiny. The sun was reflecting off it. It was a beautiful clear day, not a cloud in the sky. And as I was looking at it, I noticed that the two silhouettes, they were very tall, very thin. I couldn't see any features, but there was a silhouette there, so I could tell there was two of them. And they weren't sitting in there as a pilot in a helicopter would sit. It was sort of tilted forward, and they were sitting in a forward position. But both of them would look at each other, and then they'd look towards us. And then I noticed the object move about 5 or 10 meters lower towards us. And I actually thought at one stage that it might even land on the roof. But, as I'm watching it, it probably lasted about 2 minutes, maybe just over 2 minutes of watching this thing. It moved again, but it moved across, about 5 meters across. And I was like just stunned looking at this thing. It was the best thing I've ever seen. I didn't know, if anyone else had seen it, because they were just frozen in like mannequins, so they couldn't look around, they couldn't see anything. I was the only one who could move and who saw it, I guess. And then as I'm standing there, all of a sudden we're down on the bottom floor, and some of us were sitting on the steps and some of us were standing, and instantly, as soon as we sort of, everyone was awake and aware, we were questioning how we got down from the roof. Our last memory was that we were up on the roof, and we were just questioning each other, like, how did we get here? We were up on the roof. I mean, we're young kids, probably ranging from the age of 7 to about 12. And as we were talking about this, we're in the bottom landing, so we're inside the door. We hear our parents calling out to us, and they were really like screaming out our names and trying to get our attention, and it seemed like they were a bit frantic. So, one of us stuck his head out the door and waved, called them over and said, we're here. The parents come over, and straight away they started questioning where we had been. And we said, well, every time, we'd say we're on the roof, we were playing on the roof. And they were like, you're lying to us. Where were you? Where did you go? And apparently there was a pedophile that used to live in the town, and they were very concerned that we went past his house and he sort of took advantage of something, but we didn't. We were on the roof. We didn't go anywhere. And they kept questioning us about where we had been. And every time we said we were up on the roof, we'd either get a smack on the bottom or, you're lying. Why are you lying? Tell us where you were. And we'd repeatedly say we were on the roof. And they said, you couldn't be. We've been looking for you for over 2 hours. We've been screaming your names. No one would respond. If you were on the roof, you would have heard us. So it was pretty hard to explain. And I didn't, jump up and say, oh, we were on the roof and I saw a UFO or an object, and I didn't even know what to call it at the time. I had no clue about UFOs. So we got in trouble. We got grounded. We couldn't play for the next couple of days with each other. We had to just stay home and that. I never discussed it with anyone. I didn't tell my parents or my brothers or anyone. But it always stuck with me. It was a memory, etched in my brain, and I just could not forget. And my dad was migrated. He was working in Australia about 6 years before we came out. So we migrated in early 70s, about 3-4 years before the Civil War broke out. When we were in Australia, it's funny. I first day at school, I sat next to a guy. His name was Michael, and they sat me next to him because he was Lebanese, and although he could hardly speak a word of Lebanese, being born here, he knew a few words. So they sat me next to him, and funny, like years later, my parents bought a house, and it was one house away from his parents' place. So we grew up together, and in 1988, I was dating my high school sweetheart at the time. Her name was Vivian. We ended up getting married. It was Valentine's Day, and we were sitting in my car. We were talking about an upcoming trip to Queensland. She was gonna go up a couple of days before me, and then we were gonna meet up there with friends. And as we're sitting there, I had my back to the driver's door, and she was in the driver's seat facing me. And I just stuck my head out the window, and I saw this, I'd say baseball-sized ball high up in the sky, very, very bright, like bright white. And it was traveling from north to east. As I was watching it, I mentioned it to Vivian that, there's something in the sky. So we got out of the car, and I had a bit of cardboard. So I sort of, rolled it up and trying to look through it like a, telescope, just so I can sort of focus on the object. And it got to a point in the sky where over the Southern Cross, and it was like 3 triangular formation stars. And it stopped at the top one, at the highest one, and it just stopped like on a dime. It was moving so rapidly, so quick, and then it just stopped. And we're both watching this, and all of a sudden it shot a beam of light, which was a solid white beam of light, and it appeared at 2 places at the same time. So it appeared like a dumbbell, like a training equipment. And it did this erratically. It'd shoot a beam of light to another star in the triangular formation all the time, but so erratic, back and forth. There was no pattern. It was just back and forth. But every time that it'd shoot a beam of light, it'd appear point A and point B, disappear from point A, and then shoot a beam of light, disappear from point B to point C. It was doing that for about, I'd say, 2 minutes. And as I was watching this, I thought thousands of people in Sydney, thousands would have had to have seen it. It was like, better than any fireworks display you could see, really. And I thought it would have caught a lot of people's attention. Vivian made the comment at the time that she thought it was war with the stars. They were her exact words, war with the stars. And I said to her, no, it looks like it's searching for something. I just assumed that the beam was a searchlight, and you were looking for something. And then as I'm saying, I thought about it, and I thought, no, this thing is traveling so quick that we can see it at 2 places at the same time. So it was moving very, very quickly, and then it shot up to the top star again where it originated, and just shot up straight up into the sky, and within 2 seconds it was gone. So it had an effect on us both. We've never forgotten that. And that's when I started to think about my childhood experience, and I thought maybe it's something similar, these things. And then by that time, I still wasn't aware of the UFO field. Probably the closest thing I came to it was a British show called UFO, which they had I think it was the car impressed me more than the UFOs that they used in the show. They were hubcaps basically thrown in the air and filmed. But the car was, and I'm not sure if it was a McLaren or a Lamborghini or something, but it was amazing. Of course, had wing doors and so on. So that was the only thing at that time that I was aware about UFOs. Had no idea about the topic or how many people around the world had experienced these things. So about 6 months after that experience, I had just moved back home. I lived on my own for about 5 years and moved back home, and I was home for probably 8-9 months. And I like my privacy and my own space. So anyway, I was watching TV with my dad in the lounge room, and it was about 11:15, and a movie had just started. It was about 15 minutes into this movie. And as we're sitting there, my brother was asleep in my bedroom. He woke up, came out to the TV room and said to me, "Can you go and watch TV in your room? I want to sleep out here." It didn't make sense to me at the time, but, you know, I didn't mind my privacy. So I went into my room, and as I sat on my bed, I had a little colour Toshiba TV next to the bed. I reached over and turned the TV on, and as I went to lay on the bed, I put my hands behind my head and crossed my legs. And as I went to lay on the bed, before my head even rested on the pillow, I felt something grab me around my ankle. And to me, it felt like it could have been the index finger and the thumb, that area, but it could have been a device as well. I'm not sure. But instantly, I felt pins and needles crawl up through my legs, all the way up through my body. My face, I could feel it tingling in my face. My hair, it felt like, the way I described it back then was like thousands of ants crawling through my scalp. It was like a static electricity type thing. But I instantly became paralyzed. I couldn't move. And I had a background of, martial arts. I did a couple of different martial arts styles, and I played sports, and I was very active. I knew how to handle myself, and not being able to move, just feeling like I was paralyzed, really gave me a bit of anxiety. And I think the lucky thing for me at that time, otherwise I would have put it down to a dream, and I think a lot of people that have experiences do put it down to dreams because they don't see things. But fortunately for me, I was completely awake. I was conscious, and I had my eyes open, and I look at the foot of the bed. I'm looking like to see what grabbed me, and I see this little creature wearing a hood, and the hood was over its head, so it made its head look a lot bigger probably than what it was. But this thing looked gorilla-like. It was dark-skinned, almost like a darkish blue, black, shiny skin, deep-set round eyes, wide nose, big lips. They look gorilla-like. That's the best way I could describe them at the time. And then later on, I came across Whitley Strieber's book Communion, and the depiction of those beings blew me away, because if I sat down with an artist and gave them my rendition of what I saw, I don't think I could have got it so accurate. Whoever put that together for both the little guys and the tall guys, the goldish color with the big eyes, did a fantastic job. But anyway, so I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and I'm freaking out, and I'm thinking, this is evil, this is the devil. And then I look to my right side of the bed, and there were two more figures exactly the same. So there was three of them at that stage, and I'm literally, I was petrified because I thought it was evil. So I'm trying to get up and fight. I'm trying to, jump out of bed, and I couldn't. No matter what I did, I couldn't. So I was really stressed out. I was sweating. And then all of a sudden, because I had my eyes open, something caught my attention on the left side of the bed. And I moved my eyes across, and I could see two figures, two tall, goldish in color, big black eyes, a longer nose, like a small longer nose, with two little protrusions coming out of it. And my eyes connected with these beings' eyes, and they were that dark, they were like bigger than a horse's eyes. I just instantly, in seconds, I was relaxed. Like, I couldn't understand it. One minute I was petrified and wanting to fight, and then the next, as soon as I connected with these beings' eyes, I became totally calm. And I noticed that it was a male, and then next to him, around next to my hip, was another being, but it was a female. And the male had a surgical mask on, and nothing as big as what we have to wear now, which we're all accustomed to the masks these days. These were probably 2 fingers wide, and he had it sitting under his chin. But the female actually was wearing it over her mouth, covering her mouth. And like I said, I'm petrified 1 minute, and then the next I'm totally calm, and then I hear, calm down, relax, we're not going to harm you. I'm hearing this telepathically. I'm not hearing voices. It's a feeling. It's more so a knowing rather than voices in my head. And it was calm down, relax, we're not going to harm you. It'll be like the last time. Relax, calm down. Instantly, I thought, excuse my French, but what fucking last time? Like, what last time? What are you talking? You know, what's going on? And as he was telling me to calm down, and it did calm me down, I saw him grab like what looked like a syringe, and he grabbed it with like fingers like that, and it was almost, yeah, it was like a syringe, but it had a long tube type, almost like an optic fiber with a light at the tip of it, and he pointed it right to this spot on my head, and I blacked out. There wasn't any pain or anything, but I blacked out. I woke up what I thought was about 10-15 minutes later, and because I had been fighting this paralysis for so long, I sprung out of bed so quick and went into the TV room and tried to wake up my father, who was asleep, and I couldn't wake him up. And I'm shaking. I didn't know if the same thing happened to my brother and my father. So I'm trying to get my dad's attention. I couldn't wake him up, and it really scared me. I thought he was dead. So I turned to my brother, who was sitting in a single chair. My dad was lying across the lounge. And I shook my brother, and I was calling out his name, Sam, Sam. Now, when I was in my room, I was trying also to call out, when I felt this paralysis, I was trying to call out to my dad and to my brother. I could say my brother's name, or I could say dad in my head, but nothing would come out. My voice box was just switched off. I couldn't make a sound. So anyway, I'm shaking my brother. He wouldn't wake up, so I slapped him 3 times, really hard too. And he snapped out of it. And the first thing he said, and he said this in Arabic, he said, "I feel like I've been switched off," which didn't register with me at the time. Like, I wasn't aware of, what happens in these experiences. I said to him, "Look, I can't wake up Dad. Something's wrong with him." So we both got up, shook Dad for a couple more minutes. Eventually slapped my dad a couple of times in the face. He woke up, didn't say a word. Just, he looked like, he wasn't even there, basically. And as we were doing this, I said to my brother, "How long was it since I went to my room?" And he said, "Oh, about 10-15 minutes. And that's what I thought. And then as we're talking, we look at the TV screen, and the TV station had closed. Back then, the TV station was closed at a certain time, and you just got a blur image on the screen. We looked at the time, and it was around 3 o'clock, probably 2:45. So a couple of hours had gone by, and I had no explanation for it. I had no memory of, being taken anywhere or anything happening. So anyway, I went and grabbed a glass of water, and I took it to my room, and I sat it next to the bedside chest, and I thought to myself, if I get up in the morning and this glass of water's here, then this wasn't a dream, this really happened. So, of course, in the morning, I get up and the glass of water's there. Now, prior to this having this experience for 2 weeks, we had every night on a nightly basis, we'd have what sounded like an army footsteps, heavy footsteps, like soldiers in boots, marching down our driveway. There was nowhere for them to go because there was a garage, there was our house and the house next door, and it was just a driveway. So you couldn't disappear. You had to vanish, just disappear into thin air. You couldn't jump or climb over anything. But it was like an army. My brothers lived in the front rooms of the house. I lived down the back. So as soon as my brothers would hear the noise, they'd walk out of their room and they'd look down the driveway, and I'd look out the window and I couldn't see anything. One of my brothers put it down to my friends from my past, and they said, "Oh, your friends are playing games with you." And I said, "Okay, if it was my friends, where did they disappear to?" So there was a bit of activity there. I believe that there was some sort of a portal on my parents' property, because a lot of things were going on at the time. Anyway, just going back to the experience itself. When I got up in the morning, I went and had a shower. I was going to go and pick up my 6 hours later, actually, I was going to go and pick up my fiance from work. So I had a shower, and as I was drying off, I felt a burning sensation on my right shin. And when I had a look, it was as if someone had put a cigarette and let it burn, for a few seconds or a minute. And red raw, it was about 5 centimeters in diameter and about 5 millimeters in diameter and about 2 millimeters deep. Red raw. And I just straight away connected. I knew that it must have happened during this experience. Anyway, I went and picked up Vivian 6 hours later from work, and as soon as she got in the car, said, "What happened? What's going on?" She thought I had an argument with someone or something. I said, "Look, something happened to me last night. I've got to talk to someone. I may as well tell you." And told her my story and what happened. And as I pointed to the spot on my head, I was telling her they put something in my head. There was dry blood under my fingernail. She had a closer look, and she was like, "Oh my God, you've got like a donut. There's a donut hole there, and there's blood there." And I said, "Yeah," and I got this mark on my shin. And as I lifted my jeans up to show her, it was completely hit, like it's a scar. It's still there. You can still see it. It's a deep indentation, but it was completely healed. It wasn't red raw anymore. It wasn't sore. And so she said to me, "Look, I think you should go and see a doctor." So I dropped her off at home and I headed up to my doctor. She'd been my doctor for 10 years. And when I was talking to her, I told her the truth. I told her what happened to me, and she started laughing. And even people in the waiting room must have heard her and thought, this guy's either the funniest guy on the planet telling jokes, or the doctor's gone crazy. And I said to her, "Look, doctor, she said, oh, you probably hit your head on a nail at work. You just don't remember it." And I said, "Look, I've stepped on nails at work. I come here, I get a tetanus shot. I don't make up a story like this. And I don't appreciate you laughing at me. If you think I'm crazy, send me to a psychologist, but don't laugh at me." Anyway, I walked out, and I never went back to see her ever again. She was a really good doctor, but she let me down then, and I lost confidence. So that's where my interest started to, I wanted to know what have I been experiencing? What's happening to me? So I made some phone calls to psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors, or whoever, just anyone to speak to. And every time I'd mention to them that there was a presence in my room, as soon as I'd say that, mention that, "No, sorry, we don't deal with that," and they'd hang up on me. Eventually, I was lucky enough, I spoke to a psychologist in Queensland, and he informed me that he had heard a lot of people starting to talk about this, that they're having experiences, and he thought it was UFO and alien related. And that was the first time I heard about it, and I thought, whoa. And he informed me that there was a group forming in Sydney, and they were going to have their first meeting in a couple of weeks. So I was, that was my starting the search. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to find out everything about this. So once I had I had something I could put it to, I had a name for it, I went nutcase, basically trying to find every bit of information I could on the topic, and I bought every book I could find. I went to every library trying to, see if they had books on it, but every bookshop I went into, no matter how many books on UFOs, I bought them. It was a costly exercise. Like, they're all behind me, and there's rows and rows of books. I've spent a lot of money on it. I wouldn't say I've read every book that's there, but I've read most of them. And that's when I started to realize that, this is a worldwide phenomenon. People from different cultures, different backgrounds. There were people who don't have TV, don't have internet, and they're reporting these things happening to them, and they're reporting similar entities as well. Like, the beings were very similar. I got involved with, I'll just keep this really short. I don't want to get into the politics of it all, but I got involved with the group. I actually helped name it, and I won the competition for naming the group, which I got a UFO book as a prize. The first time I heard of Bill Chocker was during committee meetings, and he was the hot topic. I thought we were there to discuss UFOs and aliens, but it was always Bill on the agenda. And I think I didn't like the guy at first. He attended a meeting where they even called the police and tried to remove him, but Bill had bought a ticket and had every right to be there.
Wow, this is exciting news.
Yeah. And so anyway, I was selling raffle tickets, and I'd walk straight past Bill in the row of people, and I'd ignore him completely because I was told that this guy worked for the government. He was trying to, discredit all UFO witnesses and so on. I didn't like him very much. And then over a period of time, I started to realize that this guy is a really good investigator and researcher and raises the bar so high that the people that can't compete with him were bad-mouthing him because they just couldn't compete. He'd leave no stone unturned when researching a case, and I found that out myself. So I started to speak to him. We become friendly. We sort of started getting in contact with each other. And 1992 come around, and as Bill said, I had an injury at work. I was attacked by 3 blokes. I got stabbed in the chest, and I pulled the knife out, which was stupid, I know, but you don't think at the time. I had a glass bottle broken, which ripped my left arm open. I got hit on the head with a shovel twice, and the third time I turned around and blocked it, and I think that would have killed me because I had a cracked skull and I had bruising on the brain. It was a significant injury. Anyway, few months went by. I'm recovering. There was a morning where I drove Vivian to the station. She was going to work. And as I was driving, the further I got away that's what I've noticed straight away. The further I got away from home, the more ill I got. I was pulling over and just vomiting, and I don't know where it was coming from. It was just this yellow bile coming out of me, and the further I got, the more I'd have to pull up, and it's a 2-minute drive, and I probably pulled over 8-10 times and got violently sick. And on the way back, it was the same thing, but the closer I got to home, the less sick I got, and it was a longer span of me having to pull over and get sick. And I got home and I walked straight into my room and I went into my bed, and it was July, so it was a colder month of the year. I jumped into bed, I threw the quilt over me, and I was feeling sick, so I just wanted to get back to sleep. And within a couple of minutes, I felt something jump on the bed, or sit on the bed, I should say. I felt like there was an indentation in the mattress, and I thought straight away that it could be a dog or a cat. And I thought, we don't have any pets. Like, what, did something sneak in behind me? And as I sat up to look to see what caused that, there was this blonde, naked female straddling me. She was on top of me. And what happened was, as I sat up, my physical body sat up. I don't know if you want to call it my astral body, my soul, whatever. It seemed to sit up, quicker than my physical body, and I could see a transparent image of me, and I could see the female through that. And then my body caught up, my physical body caught up, and I became one again. And that's when I saw her put her hands behind my head, cupped my hands like that, and grabbed my head and pushed me towards her left breast. And I put my hands against her and pushed away. She did it a second time. I was able to put my hands against her chest again and push away. And then the third time, she just used super strength and just buried my face in her breast. And I'm claustrophobic at the best of time. So I was struggling to breathe, and I was feeling sick anyway. So my face is buried in her breast and I couldn't breathe. So the only thing I could do, I was trying to push away as much as I could, and I couldn't. She was really strong. And so I just took a little. I didn't take. People might think this is, absurd, like a real sexual thing, but it wasn't. It was a defensive thing. I took a little nip. I didn't even open my mouth. It was just sort of just bit on her skin, and I was able to push away from her. And straight away, I felt something. Could have been skin, could have been, I don't know, but it hit the back of my throat. And as soon as it hit the back of my throat, I had the worst coughing fits. It was like I swallowed acid, and it just burnt my throat. And I just had these coughing fits. I couldn't stop coughing. It was burning. Then I noticed there was another female on the bed, and she was Asian looking, and she was sitting with her legs bent under her, and she had like a bit of a little belly, and her eyes, I could hardly see any white in her eyes. They were mainly dark black, and that straight black hair. She was just like observing. She was watching, and I saw the blonde female look at her, and telepathically I picked up. She was saying to her, "He's done this wrong. Something's gone wrong. This isn't like the last time. He's done something wrong. This shouldn't happen this way." And again, I was like, "What friggin' last time? Like, what's going on? What are you talking about?" And there was a bit more communication, and I could pick up on all of it. And then I looked down, I start coughing again. And as I looked back up, they had vanished, gone. I got up, I went into the kitchen, I grabbed some bread and water and tried to wash this thing down. And the more I tried to drink and wash it down, the more my throat would burn and I'd be coughing. I had the urge to go to the bathroom and pee. And I walked into the bathroom, and as I was trying to pee, it felt like my penis had been slashed with razors. Like, it was really, really painful. Like, the worst pain. Thinking about it now, my eyes water. It was so painful. And when I had a look, I could see there were two hairs. One was sort of half wrapped around, and the other one was like in an S shape. But they were embedded into my penis, like into the skin. It's like when you push your nail into your skin, your fingernail into your skin, you get the mark, indentation. That's what it was like. And I thought, I'll take them out, I'll pull them up, out, and to keep them. And it was the most excruciating pain I've been through. I was in tears, but I managed to remove both the hairs, and I went and put them in a plastic bag straight away, sealed it, put a note on it. I wrote, the date, the, blonde female Asian, just quick notes, stuck it to it, and I put it in my filing cabinet. I went to the phone. I rang. It probably at that time, Vivian would have just got to work. And when I called her, she didn't recognize my voice, and I was coughing. So she said, "Who's this?" I said, "It's your husband." And she's like, "Oh my God, your voice sounds so different. It doesn't even sound like you." And I couldn't really talk because I was coughing so much. And I said, "Look, I can't talk now, but when I'm ready to talk to you about this, just relate this coughing to what I tell you." And it took me probably, I think, 2.5 weeks before I felt comfortable about talking to her about it. And in a way, I felt guilty. I'm going to talk to my wife about having two females, whether I invited them or not. That wasn't the point. Like, I had two females in my bedroom on my bed.
Well, that's always a good one for the marriage.
Well, luckily for me, she knows what type of person I am, and she trusts me, and we've known each other. At that time we went to school together in year 11, so I had known her. We were best of friends. She knew, like, I was in love with her, and there was no one else in this world that could replace her. Or
Right.
I was looking for it.
Absolutely.
But it was really hard to talk to her about, two females on my bed, and one of them was straddling me, and they were naked, and then the hair and all that. So anyway, we sat down and we talked about it, and the only thing she said to me was, "You know what? It's not like you invited them over or you instigated it." She goes, "It's out of your control." And I was blown away at how she just accepted it, and she was calm about it. that's where my search really kicked off, and I just really wanted to know everything. People I was involved with in the UFO group appointed me as the coordinator for people who've had experiences. And I thought I was thrown at the deep end because I was just starting to deal with my own situation, let alone taking on other people's stories. But I felt like I was strong enough, strong-willed, strong mind, I could do it. And so I started taking on board other people's stories and cases and so on. And then Bill and I were doing an interview with two female producers. They were looking at doing a documentary film for Channel 7, which is the mainstream media. And as we were talking, one of them said, she said, look, you know what, Peter, if this is really happening, there should be some evidence. It should be like a physical assault case, sexual assault case, because there should be some evidence. And I said to her, you want to see some evidence? I'll show you evidence. I walked out of the lounge room, walked into my office, retrieved the two hairs in the bag, walked back out there and showed it to them. And Bill straight away, his ears pricked up and he was like, why haven't you mentioned this to me? And I was like, you know what, Bill, my 1988 experience was strange enough. This is a can of worms I just don't want to go into open at this point in time. So straight away, he kept it on board, obviously. And then a number of years later, Bill contacted me and said, look, I've got some science biochemists who are very well credentialed, who would like to do some research, who would like to, test the hair sample. Would you be willing to do that? And by that time, I really trusted the guy. And I said, yeah, not a problem. Let's do it. And I handed him the samples, both hairs. As he said, Dr. Horace Drew was the biochemist that oversaw the tests. Bill and I kept his identity secret for 10 years. We didn't mention his name. And there were a lot of people in the UFO field who made comments directly to me that, oh, Bill Chocker did the test in his shed on the piece of newspaper. And I could have easily named the guy that did it. And, my case would have got more credible in their eyes. But I didn't want to betray the guy's confidence. And for 10 years, we didn't release his name to anyone.
And so let me ask you, because, when you were describing your initial encounter, some people were suggesting that this could be sleep paralysis. And Bill, I want you to weigh in on this, because I have had episodes of sleep paralysis, and it does sound, I've had similar experiences that frightened me to death with regard to that. And so, Bill, when you were looking at all of this and figuring out whether this was something that you wanted to look into as an experienced researcher, what made Peter's case stand out to you? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, I think people have to realise here that we're dealing with an investigation that took place over a long time, many years. And the thing that attracted me to Peter initially was the integrity that he had, the conviction that he told the original 88 experience about. But it was this 1992 experience that provided me initially with the idea that we could, for the first time, apply DNA forensic techniques to an actual claim of an alien abduction. Because most cases were only supported by things like hypnosis, that kind of thing. Very little in the way of compelling physical evidence. And so irrespective of all the claims about what might explain things, be it sleep paralysis or whatever, at least here we had a biological sample. Now, I said to Peter from the get-go that we could apply these DNA forensic techniques, but there was a hell of a risk for Peter. If the sample turned out to be prosaic, he would have a lot of explaining to do. based on the personal front and more broadly. And Peter was always had the conviction to let's do it. You know, he wanted to know what the hell this was about. Now, I've got to be honest here. We really thought that the DNA would and the forensic techniques that we applied to it would be entirely prosaic. We weren't expecting anything remarkable, but we wanted an opportunity to apply these techniques to an extraordinary claim and see what happens. So, as always, we were led by the evidence where it led to. And remarkably, in Peter's case, we had a situation where the DNA more or less supported what he was saying. We ended up, this was a multi-phase investigation over years. And when we had funding, we were able to proceed at various paces. But first of all, we focused on the shaft of the hair to try and see what would emerge from that. And from that, we got this rare Asian Mongoloid DNA. Now, Mongoloid doesn't mean the condition; it means the ethnicity of the hair sample. That there was a rare Asian Mongoloid DNA profile present in that shaft of the hair, and that in itself, in turning up in a blonde hair sample, was quite remarkable, and it certainly excited the DNA researchers like Horace Drew, whose expertise in this area was on the worldwide stage quite well documented. And he worked in some of the leading DNA labs around the world, that kind of thing. And also, as I said earlier, was the co-author of a university-recommended textbook on understanding DNA. That was the title of the book, and required reading by university students. And with that, that was the main initial stage of the investigation. That result that there was a rare Asian Mongoloid DNA profile present in a hair sample that appeared, but for all intents and purposes, physiologically, it appeared to be a blonde hair sample. And with Asian Mongoloid DNA, you would expect that the hair would have been black or quite dark. And this wasn't the case. So there was an initial anomaly. We also had the opportunity to do what's called CCR5 deletion factor testing, or testing of the nuclear DNA. That's when we verified the presence of this CCR5 deletion factor. That is quite a handy capacity to have. The donor of the hair sample, for some reason, appeared to have this attribute in their DNA, and that confers on people that have that an immunity to things like smallpox, AIDS, that kind of thing. So that in itself was a remarkable constellation of DNA results that we're getting. But years later, we were able to do further research with further funding to then focus on the root of the hair, because we wanted to keep that as our final stage, simply because we're only going to get one opportunity at this. We replicated the work done on the shaft of the hair. That confirmed the previous results. But then when we started examining the root of the hair, we got an entirely different profile, a consistent profile, which was different to the shaft of the hair. And when you look at it from a DNA biochemistry point of view, you realize that this shouldn't be the case. Wherever you take a sample from, be it the shaft, the root, blood, skin, that kind of thing, you should get consistent DNA profiles from the same sample. But in this case, we only had the hair, but we should get consistent DNA from the shaft and the root, and we weren't getting that. And the DNA chemists were really gobsmacked. What's going on here? This shouldn't be happening. And so to them, it was a really interesting kind of breakthrough result. And it seemed to imply that what we were dealing with was evidence of advanced cloning techniques. So this was kind of astonishing for us, and that's what became the focus of the totality of the investigation. It seemed to imply that, bizarrely, we had evidence here, and this is where probably the main part of the scientific problem is that we're only dealing with one sample. If we had hundreds of samples, unfortunately we don't have hundreds of samples, we had potential evidence supportive of what appeared to be a hybrid DNA. And so that's what we ended up sort of documenting and highlighting and publishing in Hair of the Alien and in a number of reports. People can find out details via the book Hair of the Alien or via my website, which I've called Alien DNA Paradigm. It summarises all the different kinds of investigations that we've done of this case and of Peter's experience.
We'll talk a lot, and I've got some questions here in chat that I just want to address. And so Spaghetti Lee wanted me to ask you if you can tell us the genome type number.
That I don't have in front of me. You can go to my website. If you go to the Oz Files, that's the Oz Files, oz.com.au, you'll on the side there, you'll see a direct link to the Alien DNA Paradigm, and that will give you all the data. One of the stipulations I had when I wrote Hair of the Alien was that we must keep the full DNA report that Horace Drew and the other researchers contributed to in the book. We didn't want a dumbed down summary of the data. We wanted the full data. So all the DNA data is in the book and on the website. So you can have a look at that. But the key finding was that there was this rare Asian mongoloid DNA profile in the shaft, but in the root of the hair sample, there was this rare bar scalic DNA profile as well. So we had this contradiction, what appears to support a hybrid type profile.
And it's fascinating, and I've got, because I know we're getting to show close, and there's so many questions that I have. My mind is just spinning. But
yeah, we're trying to summarize decades of research here.
I know. Well, you'll have to come back, and I have to ask you, Peter, when you mentioned that you had gone to some of these support groups and things, who were some of the first people that approached you, and what was their mindset? Because for me here in America, when I've gone to different conferences, I've been approached by people that have been inserting things that I don't necessarily find are truthful with things, and it's been a very kind of a sketchy situation. And so did you have anything where you felt like you were being given misinformation or being led down a path that wasn't necessarily in your best interest?
Yeah, look, sure. A lot of people want to put their spin on everything, and I tend to not let that taint the way I think about this, what I do. But I just with the sleep paralysis thing, I know a lot of people who have sleep paralysis and have experiences, but I don't think sleep paralysis, you can produce a hair sample or two hairs that have results that what the test showed. After that, I was actually telling Bill that I was more than happy to take a truth serum that the military use, or lie detector test, polygraph. And 2011, there was a show in Australia, and the producers had contacted me a number of times over 3 months, and I just didn't want to be involved in the show. Eventually, I got a phone call from a head producer, and he said, "Look, if you really believe in this and you want to give it credibility, we think you should be involved, because the show's not going anywhere." So I got involved, and they came and interviewed me. Bill was present, and then that was on a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, while I was just about to go walk into work, I received a call from one of the had a scientific background, who was involved in the show, and just out of the blue, he asked me, "Would you take a lie detector test?" And I instantly said yes. And then when they actually aired the footage on TV, I hadn't seen his reaction. He was like, "Wow, The guy didn't even take a breath, didn't think about it, didn't say, I'll get back to you. Yep, I'll do it. Let's go do it. And the only reason I did that, the only reason I jumped at that chance is because I had been wanting to do it for so long. And I remember Bill telling me it cost a couple of $1,000s, but we had the opportunity here to get it done, and the TV crew were going to pay for it. And the reason I chose to do it was because I thought it was 100% accurate. That's the only reason I took it. I sat the test, I passed it. Now, there was a big debate. Bill was completely against me taking it because he can see that there's no, you can't use it in a court of law. Police use it to sort of put people in a position where if they refuse to take a test, it sort of casts some doubt over their credibility. But I passed the test, and when the polygraph examiner actually said to the people involved in the show that Peter passed, with flying colours, he's telling the truth. And I was disappointed because the questions that they asked me through the polygraph were about my 1988 experience. Not one question was asked about the 92, two females, and the DNA. And I actually, before he unhooked all the equipment off me, I said to him, aren't you going to ask me about my 1992 experience? And he said to me, Peter, if you're telling the truth about your 88 experience, then you're obviously telling the truth about 92. But I would have preferred to have been asked the questions about it, just for my, for me, just for my thing. But I got involved in this because I had my own personal experience. And then over time, I started to realize there were millions of people around the world. So I actually started the first support group in Australia for abductees. And we started in April 1993, and it was called the UFO. It still exists now, and it's called the UFO Experience Support Association. And we set it up with the help of psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, hypnotherapists, doctors. We had a lot of support. It was unbelievable. And, people like Bud Hopkins, we did an interview with Bud Hopkins, and I actually asked Bud, would he think that, someone in my position who had an experience and I'm dealing with it myself, would I be effective running a support group? And he said, you're probably in a better position than a lot of people because you can relate to them. Professor John Mack, he came out to Australia, and that he requested, a workshop support group. So I organised that, and it was really successful. But John interviewed me. He put me through one regression session, and he was pretty impressed with my story and credibility, and he appointed me the Australian representative for PEER, which is Program for Extraordinary Experience Research, based at Harvard. I recall also his partner, his assistant Dominic, he was having issues with some television station that were trying to take all his research, and they were threatening legal action and to shut him down and everything. All his African research and Australian research. And I remember Dominic saying to him, Peter's the only one you can trust. Give him all your information and it'll be safe. He's not going to share it with anyone. And that's how it would have been. No one would have, to this day, no one would have seen it. And it was a real heartbreak for me, and a sad time when I got a phone call to inform me that my wife actually at the time called me, and she said to me, you're not going to believe this. Professor Mack has been killed in England by a hit and run drunk driver. I rang up Dominique, and as soon as I said hello, the first thing she said was, oh my God, Peter, your voice brings back so many good memories. John's gone. And it devastated me. It still does to this day. John came out here just to investigate cases, and he became like a father figure to me. We become really close, and we spent a lot of time together, and I really appreciate that. But the field lost, a major player when he was taken, and I'm so sorry for that.
I remember, reading his work and Hopkins and Whitley Strieber and all of these people their work was so influential and shaped me a lot when I was growing up. And the more that I've looked into certain things, the more I have questions about, their affiliations, where they were getting funding. I do know that Bigelow did fund several of these researchers, which concerns me greatly, given what I know about the depths to which this subject can be used to hurt people, manipulate people, and perhaps continue MK Ultra at some level. And so I've got to ask you, do you think that there was ever any chance, and Bill, I'm going to ask you this because you've been in this for so long, would there be any chance that some of this was actually weapons testing or using people and their profiles to perhaps do something that was more nefarious? Because I believe that has happened. So, and I'm not saying if that is happening in your case, Peter, but I do have some questions about these people that have been involved in this for a long time. And let me turn on your
Bill?
mic.
And
Hang
by, it's a very complicated. It needs hours of discussion to really address that kind of topic appropriately. It's something you cannot do in a soundbite.
Look, funding is hard to come. Funding is hard to come by in this field. I think when someone offers some funding, people jump at that, not looking at the repercussions or the effects that could have or what their agenda might be. And I know, if people want to give you money, they want your information. They want to hang on to it and they want to use it for their own needs. I just want to quickly say that I've had a number of other experiences. One was 1996, and Professor Mack, probably a couple of weeks after, before he visited Australia, I had that experience. And I had an experience in 2008, which out of all my experiences affected me more than anything in my life. And I'm going to quickly just mention that. I had an experience where I was taken on a craft, and the craft, I could see it getting closer to what looked to me like a building, and it was, bright white building with really huge windows that were darkly tinted. And I sort of floated out of the UFO into this building, but I was coming through the ceiling. And as I was coming down through the ceiling, just sort of hovering, just lowering down very slowly, I saw a female lying in bed, and she would have been in her 40s. She had straight black hair. I'd say Italian sort of looking, maybe. And I was getting closer and closer to her, and I could see her terror in her face, in her eyes, and the closer I got, the more scared she got. And when I was like 4 inches, 5 inches away from her face, I saw tears run down her face, and it really, really broke me. It broke my heart. And as I got within a couple of inches from her, I actually mouthed the words, "I am so, so sorry." And I said, so, so sorry twice. I am so, so sorry. And I think she knew that it wasn't something that I instigated, that we both had no control over what was going on. But what brought this really hit me, I was reading a book, I believe it was Richard Boylan, maybe. And in the book, there's a story in there about a lady, and she's saying she was in bed and she saw this, man come down from the ceiling and levitate over her. And she said that she was crying, and then that the person mouthed the words to her, "I am so, so sorry." And I think that it's that person. There's a big possibility that could have been. And a lot of people that I've spoken to have said to me, "You should find that person. You should make contact with her." And I keep saying, no. Why should I put that on someone who may not be ready or may not want to, discuss it, or might be traumatized by it, just for my own benefit? So in a way, that really emotionally was probably the biggest impact on my life in the UFO field. It took a toll on me, that.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, I can't imagine how difficult this has been, for you to have these experiences and then to get kind of thrown into all of this and to receive some of the blowback, because obviously this isn't it's never easy to come forward with information like this. And I think for me, having really kind of taken a head dive literally into not only the subject, abductions, but the people involved, it's been a very enlightening and a little bit disturbing thing for me to try to understand what's going on. And I was at one point in time, I was on the MUFON experiencer team, and I quickly learned that I was neither qualified nor did I had no business giving anybody advice when there should be somebody that is credentialed, that is dealing with trauma, that is dealing with this type of thing. And in the UFO field, there's so many people that come in, and you go to conferences. I mentioned this on many shows, where you have somebody who's leading an abduction experiencer group, and they are putting thoughts into people's minds.
Yep.
This is a gray alien, this is a Pleiadian. They're giving you these messages of love and light. Or better yet, you've been abducted, you're a military abduction hybrid of A, B, C, and D. And so people have had traumatic experiences, and then they're being filled full of absolute garbage. And to me, I think the more I've learned, the more I feel that this is really alarming. And I'm sure you've seen that as well. I think that, at some point in time, we need to make sure that we've got credentialed people in here that are dealing with trauma, that we're not instilling some sort of political or religious ideology. And I want to ask you, Bill, because you've mentioned in your interviews about how you've seen some of the people with this religious fervor that have stepped into the subject. And so, Bill, I mean, what do you think about that, and how people insert religious ideology into this subject?
It's a very complex problem, but I've got to say here that with Peter's experience, more than any other experience in this field, it has added to me a certainty that something very strange is going on here that shouldn't be kind of bogged down in other people's agendas to promote certain viewpoints. Um, Peter's been really solid in terms of being guided by the evidence. He has his own take or spin that's defined by his own personal world experiences and that kind of thing. And I give full credit to that. But he's also always wanting to be guided by what's actually going on here. And like a lot of people, he's just trying to understand what's really happening here. And unfortunately, the field has been bogged down in a lot of controversy, a lot of agendas by some major researchers and enthusiasts and that kind of thing. And I would like to hope that this area can be substantially rehabilitated by some serious, scientifically orientated and, where appropriate, social, therapeutic kind of skills as well. It needs to be looked at from a multidisciplinary point of view. And there's something really important going on here.
I agree, and I just have to apologize for this really strange sound that we're having tonight. I've never had sound quite like this, but I absolutely agree. That this should be approached with the utmost caution and care, and it should be put into the hands of people that have that are credentialed, that are not looking at this from strictly making money off of the UFO narrative, or pushing people down a dark hole. And I think that is it's just a fascinating topic, and I commend both of you for coming forward and talking about this. And Bill, your research there's so many more things that I need to talk to you about and have you on the show time and time again to learn about. I love this. I love the history. I love learning personal experiences, about people. And Peter, again, thank you for coming forward and talking about this. I know it's not easy, and I'm sure that this has been a hard part for you with your family and your friends to come forward, and so thank you very, very much for
Thank
coming
you
on
for
the
giving me the
show.
opportunity. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And I'm glad you mentioned what your point that you just made. My pet hate is when somebody leads someone that's looking for answers, and they lead them in a way, whether it's a hypnotherapist, whether it's a counselor. And I actually stopped using certain hypnotherapists because we saw that they were asking leading questions, taking people down the road that what their theory is, and they want to prove it by leading people into that. And I'm totally against that. But I'm proud to say that the support group that we set up in '93 has helped a lot of people, and at no cost to them. If I was in the building game at the time, and I had some money, and I used to pay for people to have their therapy sessions or their hypnosis. No one paid out of their own pocket, so we didn't want it to be a business for any individual hypnotherapist or counselor. We just wanted people who genuinely cared and wanted to help people. We didn't want it to be a money-making venture.
Right. And that is it's hard because it's you're investing your time, your money. I mean, there's so much going into this, and then you also want to make sure that you are careful with the people that are coming to you and giving you their information. And that's one thing for me, and that I have to keep bringing up Bigelow, because I think that there's so much there that is really disturbing about that. But buying and selling people's personal information with regard to their UFO sightings and very personal experiences, I think that is a major problem. And so I appreciate you for for addressing that situation, and it's amazing, and I look forward to talking to you again. It is nice to meet you, Peter, and Bill. Finally, it's nice to meet you. And again, I apologize for the technical things tonight. I mean, I've had some strange things happen, but I will say the sound tonight has been exceptionally strange. So who knows?
Yep.
But Bill, where can we find your work? And I know you've done blogs over the years. You've contributed a great deal. Where can we find you, and how do people get a hold of you?
Well, I think probably the best place to go to is the ozfiles.blogspot.com, and there's a whole bunch of links to that. That's where I mainly drop everything onto. Okay. Well, I've lost sound here, so.
Well, of course, because certain people have not pressed the unmute. So, Peter, where can people find you? And is there a place? Are you just kind of laying low? What are you doing?
Well, we've got the website, the UFO Experience Support Association. I'm not as active on it as I should be, but it's there, and we're getting 20, 30 hits daily, basically. And there's a lot of things attached to this field that people haven't talked about or don't address. And Bill and I have been talking about this. There's high strangeness around people who have these experiences, and I've had some really crazy experiences the last 2 years. 2017 and 2020, and I would love to at one stage discuss those with you. This is physical marks on my body that I was watching happen. I could see the scratches, for example, or there's high strangeness that goes around this that I don't think has been addressed and spoken about in the field.
And I think that would be very important to talk about, because you hit something on the head. This is, you have the initial encounter, and then you have all these different events that kind of play into things, and that is really fascinating, and I would love, love, love to not only have a private conversation with you at some point in time, but then have you back on the show, both of you back on the show, and talk about this. And again, thank you for coming on the show. This is really cool, and I'm going to have to replay it and think about what both of you have said. And it's just thank you very, very
Thank
much.
you. It's been a pleasure. I really, really
Absolutely.
enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, and thanks for waking up so early. Now maybe you guys can go take a nap.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Peter.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it very, very much. Thank you again for hanging. I seriously, I have a 2 hour time limit, and I keep on going because I love this topic so much, and because when I start to kind of peel back the layers, and one question leads to another, and then my brain gets going, and it's a fascinating topic. I fully believe that there is something very worthy of exploring. And as you know, because you're here every Friday night with me and now with Scott, because we're doing a YouTube show, this is I mean, that we can study people, we can study the phenomena, we can study all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, my life has been so greatly enriched by what I've learned, by the people that I've met, by the history that I am grateful to be able to preserve. And then I get into chat and I see, shadowy spectrums, Spaghetti Lee, Matthew, all of you that get in there, and you are so respectful and ask incredible questions. And I know that we are creating a whole new narrative, and we are also questioning a narrative that has been put in play for decades. And it is a narrative that is not based on fact, but is based on people making a lot of money off of their stories that at the end of the day can't be backed up. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Bill, thank you, Peter. You guys take it easy, stay safe. I'll try not to get in trouble over the next week, but I can't guarantee anything. You know how I roll. You can find me at ufoclassified.com. You can become a Patreon. I want to thank all of the people that support the show. Thanks all of you for donating to Super Chat. Stay safe, and we will catch you next week.